Emmanuel, God with us. We begin with the story from Matthew's Gospel. Now, the birth of Jesus the Messiah took place in this way. When his mother Mary had been engaged to Joseph, but before they lived together, she was found to be with child from the Holy Spirit. Her husband Joseph, being a righteous man and unwilling to expose her to public disgrace, planned to dismiss her quietly. But just when he had resolved to do this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, "Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife, for the child conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will bear a son, and you are to name him Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins." And all this took place to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet. "Look, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall name him Emmanuel," which means God is with us. The name is a promise. Emmanuel, God is with us. It was the name of the prophet foretold. It is the name that contains our hope. In uncertain times, it is God's promise of one who would come to save us that gives us hope. In the coming of Jesus, God's promises were fulfilled and continue to be fulfilled each Advent as we wait anew for his coming. It is what C.S. Lewis called the grand miracle, the story of incarnation. At Christmas, we contemplate what it means that God became one of us, a weak and helpless infant, out of love for humankind, even those who would reject him, ignore him, and commercialize the celebration of his birth. Throughout the Old Testament, the anticipation of the coming Messiah was in the context of oppression and injustice. The coming of Emmanuel brings peace into the violence of our world and fills our hungry souls. In the birth of the Christ child, God comes to dwell among us. In this season of Advent, we wait with open hearts for Emmanuel, praying that his love will find its way into our hearts anew. Our prayer is the same as the meaning of the name. God, be with us, fill us, and heal our broken hearts. In its focus on the past, present, and future, Advent symbolizes a spiritual journey as we celebrate the coming of Jesus as a baby in Bethlehem, his presence in the world today, and the promises of his future coming. For us, Advent is not just about the coming of God into the world long ago, or even the anticipation of God's future coming. It is also about opening our hearts to the presence that is still among us. It calls us to name the ways God comes into our lives and in our time. And it is about what we do with our time, how we use it to bring about peace and justice in the world, to respond to Jesus' call to love one another and to bear witness to the reality of God's presence here and now as we wait in hope. In one of our most beloved Christmas carols, Hark the Herald Angels Sing, Charles Wesley writes of the incarnate deity pleased in flesh with us to dwell, Jesus, our Emmanuel. We need to know that God is with us in our lives and in our world. We need to know that God's vision is larger than our own and calls us to become Christ-like in our thoughts and actions. We need to believe that God is with us. In the darkness of our world, looking for the promised Messiah calls for a bold statement of faith in the one who will come and bring an end to war and strife, the one called Prince of Peace, whose first coming transformed society, but whose coming again will forever establish justice and righteousness. But Emmanuel, God with us, does not mean that God is with only us, to the exclusion of the rest of the world. God comes to the weak and the outcast, as well as to the powerful and mighty. We echo the call for Emmanuel to come, not with the glib assurance of our own righteousness and faithfulness, but with the humility of those who recognize that God's great gift of love came in the form of a child whose long-awaited birth brought hope to all the earth, and still promises hope to those who wait. One of the most influential voices of his day was German pastor and theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who wrote, "Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace, this is how we speak at the manger of Bethlehem. This is how the worlds pile up on one another at the sight of the divine child." Yet these words are finally, in fact, nothing other than a wordless silence of adoration before the inexpressible, the presence of God in the form of a human child, Emmanuel. John Wesley's biographer, John Telford, wrote that on March 2nd, 1791, Wesley, on his deathbed, opened his eyes and spoke these words, "The best of all is this: God is with us." Seattle minister Edward Marquardt tells the story of two sisters, both octogenarians, living on a rundown farm in North Dakota. The chicken coop was falling down, the barn was falling down, the rusted machinery was falling apart. But these two siblings were as tough as nails. They had weathered every storm for the past 60 years. The story goes that one autumn day, a nephew came to visit them from the city, and he took out a camera to take a picture of his weather-worn aunts, with the barn and chicken coop and the rusted machinery in the background. The old aunts loved that photograph and decided to use it for their Christmas card that year. At the top of their picture, they put the words, "Merry Christmas." And at the bottom was written, "God is with us in our mess." That is the message of Christmas, that God is with us in our mess. And when life gets messy, as it surely does, we can trust the promise of Emmanuel, that God truly is with us. God is with us when children get in trouble. God is with us when families break up. God is with us when illness strikes and when death comes. God is with us when the future seems uncertain, even when our culture suspends belief in God. And as we wait in hope during this Advent season, the best of all is this: Emmanuel. God is always with us. Amen.